player Will.
Hey there, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today, this is the Dagger character review, the new Final Fantasy IX unit given to us for free, technically, as of last week. This is today's character review, and pretty standard things, but for those of you that did not see this Dawn character review yet, I am changing some things here. I'm taking away the Esper Synergies part at the end, and I'm adding in some sample builds. I have 3 different builds to go through today, but other than that, it's the character overview, all the stat analysis that leads up to the report card, where we combine those stats with what we know in the kit, some general thoughts where I hyper-focus on some things I want to talk about. I'll talk about the passives, counters, the job abilities, the auto priority, things of that nature. But we'll kick things off for now with the character overview. She's a brand new Earth unit added to the game. They gave her the Princess of Alexandria unique main job with Sword Sorcerer and Kotodama Wielder as the subjobs. We have not seen many Sword Sorcerers. That was the Valentine Miranda unique job that came out at the time, and Dagger is the beneficiary of this one here too. She does equip maces, hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 90 cost unit, and she's most definitely a 97 faith recommended unit. Now for her main job attributes, her max range is 5 squares away, which is on a giant diamond. It is the only AoE on the main job, and she's got 2 single target abilities as well. From a resistance standpoint, her strength here is 15% to magic. She's got an innate 10% to strike. She's got 0% to pierce, which is a little unique. Most units lately have at least some kind of negative to pierce, so she's kind of slightly ahead, not by much on that regard, but 5% to slash and minus 15% to missile, which there is a counter ability of hers that has some counterplay for this very strong negative weakness, but definitely something to look out for. From the 140, the mastery ability, they gave her 5% magic, which pretty much useless. 10% reduction of all magic damage taken, though, is very good. Obviously pairs really well with her 15% magic resistance. That 10% total reduction is absolutely a really great thing in the current magic meta that we're seeing. They gave her 20 crit evasion as well, puts her very high in the total scheme of the game, and 20 magic res pen innately as well, which I think is really smart. Overall, some hits or misses here. The 5% magic is kind of a joke, but as we move on here to the stats, looking at the base HP, she's not in a bad space, particularly when you consider that she's a damage dealer, but she's got a little bit of a support AI. She's very much like Soul as the best example, where she will always opt to do damage if possible, but if there's a healing opportunity, she will take advantage of it. She does have a curative limit break, so it is part of it. So from a support or pseudo support standpoint, not the worst starting spot for a base HP. Compared to the damage dealers, it's kind of paltry, but little, coming in below that 75th percentile, but I wouldn't call it a weakness. I just wish it was a little bit higher for where it ends up ending up. We'll talk about that in the sample builds. The base magic stat, honestly, a pretty good spot too. She's amongst some of the highest in the game here. 417 base magic is definitely a really good spot. In my couple sample builds, she doesn't end up with a hugely high magic stat, but the base magic is definitely promising, to say the least. From a base agility, she's relatively average, maybe just a very small step down here in that bottom of the 25th percentile, but we know a couple of agility points here or there on base agility isn't the end of the story. Typically, there's other things that go into that. From a base dexterity, she's right below the median here, but basically in the group of characters where most units fall into. Not necessarily a character known for her critical hit rate, totally fine there. And base luck, she's basically seemingly average too. Now, she is closer to that 75th percentile, but in terms of bucketing her attributes and compared to other characters, she's basically average, all things considered. So overall, when you combine those charts into one to see some relative strengths and weaknesses, there's not that are really awful. The base agility is definitely lower than what you'd like to see. Her total agility ends up kind of average. We'll talk about that soon. But when you incorporate the board nodes, the board stats, mastery abilities, things like that, yeah, there's some slight deficiencies here. That HP takes a pretty big hit. Dexterity certainly does too. They do give her 11 agility on the board, which does kind of make up for things. Again, that's why base agility is only one part of the story. But overall, stat-wise, it's okay. That magic stat is not nearly as high as I would have liked it to end up being. That 5% magic, it's literally just 21 magic stat they gave her. It's basically nothing in the game in this day and age. Now, when we add in agility vision cards here, she is right on the cusp of 78. And I say that because when we go to bucket her into these charts on the right, she is right on the cutoff of where my 2 different groups are. So while she seems like she might be a step below, it's like really not by much. She's essentially right there for the average agility. She's got no passives to boost it though. She'll still stay there at average agility, which not great. It's not bad, not great. I'll leave it at that. We'll obviously talk more about agility in a little bit. When we look at the crit hit rate overall, she's got no crit rate board nodes, which many damage dealers do. She does not. And her dexterity rate's kind of whatever. So overall crit rate is not really in a good spot. That crit avoidance rate, though, is among some of the highest in the game, really driven by that 140 where they gave her that 20 crit evade. So that's a really good thing for part of her survivability, that she won't take all that increased crit damage. We talk about accuracy, putrid accuracy, one of the worst that you could possibly get here. There's no accuracy boosting passives. There's really no buffs for accuracy either. So total accuracy is not there. That being said, hold the phone, everybody. I know she's a damage dealing unit, like I said, but for a lot of these units that are pseudo supports, low accuracy is not necessarily a weakness. This is one of those opportunities that should you encounter an evade team, if her hit rate is 0, she'll default to buffs or curative potential, which still adds value to the fight. So overall, this is a definite weakness, yes, but it's not the end of the story, like it could be for some damage dealers who absolutely need to do damage every single turn. Now for the evasion, not even remotely an evade unit. She's just on this very bottom gradient of what you could possibly get. I wouldn't even attempt it, even with Earth, who gets all that extra evasion. Now for the report card, effective HP overall, going with a C- here. She's got 6 Spirit innately, no defense, no AoE res, but 15 AoE res on a passive you'll have on most of the time. So that 15 AoE res is a big thumbs up. No unit res innately, but her actual HP stat, where it ends up, is kind of whatever, so that all things considered, her effective HP is about that C-. She doesn't really have any immensely strong weapon type resistances either, so it's okay, could be better. The survivability, I will go with a B+ here though. She does give herself a re-raise. She's got exceptionally high spirit, which one of her main abilities, I'll talk about this throughout the presentation, is to reduce enemy spirit penetration. So while normally spirit isn't the greatest stat to hang your hat on, her niche is reducing how much of that stat they can penetrate. So this is a good form of survivability. It's just obviously niche to those magic-oriented units only. Now she does have protect and shell access. She does have a magic barrier access, and her limit break is a giant AoE heal, and she's got a Cura strength follow-up attack that will heal a local ally or even herself. So there is some survivability in the kit in terms of how she replenishes health. Very much skewed though on the anti-magic side, which again, being a prisoner of the moment sounds really great, but in the broad scheme of the game, it's going to make her a little bit niche as things go on. Now for the damage, I'm going with a B- here. She can easily get 40 magic res pen, which actually is pretty nice. 50 spirit pen pretty easily too, no effort at all, which is the bare minimum. I'm pretty happy with that. But no imperils, very average magic stat from what I've seen in the builds. I'm not expecting her to do a ton of damage, quite honestly. Her big AoE as well as a typeless magic attack that can be really great sometimes for bypassing the earth resistance people might have, but on the other side, that ability won't get all the earth attack up modifiers either way, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. Either way, B- for the damage. Agility, I'm going with that C- here. She's at that 77 versus the 78 average. Falls slightly behind average with the passives equipped, so kind of rounding down there to that C-. The accuracy, I'm going with F here, very much below average accuracy. She does have a 100% hit chance on the Kotodama subjob though, but not something I'd really lean into or build for. Now the evasion, also going with a D here, no evasion potential in my opinion. The movement, I'm going to go with a C+ here. Here's the thing. The Kotodama subjob has that buff, that's the move one, jump one, but there's so many other buffs in her kit, I don't see this being a really viable option to use. So I'm going to give her a point for it, but really not practical, so I'm going to keep it pretty low at the C+ here. The auto ease of use, I think this is one of the big problems too. I'm going with a D here. You have lots of buffs to pick from. Each sub-job offers something kind of different. Some of the main job buffs can repeat, which is a big downside. The soul-like AI is a really good thing for auto ease of use. Auto priority should be pretty straightforward, but I think her biggest upside, quite personally, is in rainbow teams, which is difficult for the average player, just being frank, which means for the auto ease of use, I think you're going to find difficulty in really maximizing her value, because I think it's a little bit harder to build those rainbow teams for that average player. Now for the game disruption, I'm going with a C here, pretty much average. Doesn't really help in the Earth versus Lightning matchup if that's what you're going for. Earth already has a ton of really great options for anti-lightning. She doesn't really add anything extra for that. She is an anti-magic oriented upgrade though, so that if you were going against like severe lightning magic, yeah, sure, maybe she's the upgrade there, but other than that, I don't think she offers a ton of that element. And although I do like her in the rainbow teams, I think there's enough deficiencies in her that it's not going to overtake the game. I think she's going to have good results, not great results. Now for passives, I'm going with a C+ here. one amazing passive. The rest are only okay. We'll go through that soon. The counter abilities are also going to see very average counters. They're not bad, but very average. The overall job and kit, going with a B here. She's kind of niche. That's the problem. The subjobs do have interesting value, that we'll talk about those soon. And there's some good roll compression with what they've done with her AI and that Kira follow-up. So overall, I don't hate what they've done conceptually with her. It's just niche. But the final grade, I got to go with a B-. I always have to dock characters points if they really only have one strong niche. The other big demerit for her is that she's statistically somewhat inferior compared to many other units. There's a ton of overlap with many of the other Earth units as well, so in terms of an incentive to build, she doesn't really separate herself enough from the pack, if that makes sense. But as a mace unit, I really do like where she fits into some other opportunities in the game. We'll talk about that toward the very end. Now for the general thoughts, this girl is in desperate need of a reincarnation. I say that tongue-in-cheek. I never talk about, whether you should or shouldn't on this channel, but her HP and her magic stat are enough below average that I look at the stats and I'm like, man, this girl needs them to really be viable for what I consider the top end of the game, speaking frankly. So yeah, I say this tongue-in-cheek, but the stat deficiency is noticeable. She has an excellent pseudo support though. To me, she's top of the mace chart for value in that regard, right there with Sadali, who does have a curative spell on the Devout sub-job. He does have some really excellent buffs, some of the best in the game, quite frankly, that if you're trying to mix a mace unit in there, I think she's right there with him for the best option you could possibly pick. I do think that she's a highly recommended producer's bow tie unit, something that reduces her move -1. That's part of the auto ease of use, where I think it's difficult for many, where, I want her to get multiple buffs off here. I want to keep her out of the direct front line because she does have that, damage dealing AI that she'll keep moving forward 3 squares if possible. The moment you introduce bow tie, you get into a whole different level of complexity in team building. So although recommended, and you'll see that in my sample builds, it can be tough to make work, she does have that strong anti-magic niche. I'm beating a dead horse here, but it's true. Her giant AoE abilities, that Spirit Pen reduction of 30 for 3 turns to the enemies. She gives Shell to a teammate. Her Sword Sorcerer sub-job has a 25% magic res buff and Shell, so you have a secondary source of access to that Shell. The Kotodama sub has a 50% magic barrier, 20 AoE res, and that Mastery ability is a 10% reduction of all magic damage. So it's clear as day that's really what she's tuned to do. She does get a good attempt at modern survivability tools. That 20 crit evade is certainly noteworthy nowadays. The 40 elemental chain res that you'll get on a passive ability is also, again, kind of a good thing for the modern era of the game. So I'll give him props for that. The Spirit Stones on a Truststone set, though, are highly recommended to fill that anti-magic niche. To me, you either go and build her for that or nothing. Not only will it give her that extra spirit, which helps her survivability, but you get that extra healing power 10, and when you give her the Truststone passive as well, that'll make that 120 mod on the Cura follow-up go to 144% healing, which I think is a really important thing to add into that team sustainability. Now, she does have decent enough penetrations from a support perspective. I was a little bit surprised by this. They gave her 50 Spirit Pen, 40 Magic Res Pen with the weapon. I think that's serviceable, quite honestly. You can still use a TMR, which I am recommending. You'll see that in the sample builds to further increase some of that Magic Res Pen, but we'll get there later. I think there's some really interesting synergy, though, with the Sword Sorcerer sub-job with Earth. There's a couple double hits there. One of them gives her Slash Res Pen 40, where when you consider the Earth Vision cards for the Slash Res Pen already on there, she's got another one that increases all magic damage by 15%. That I think there's something really cool there to play with. But that's really the general thoughts. We'll get through the job now. From the passive abilities, Resolution of Princess is the must equip. That's 12 Spirit, 40 Spirit Pen, 15 AoE res, and 40 Elemental Chain res. They knocked this one out of the park. The rest of these, they're okay. They've kind of locked her into spell boost though, with the decrease of skill activation time. I'm going to go through cast times in a couple slides here. So this one is a noteworthy one for making sure her skills go off at an appropriate time. If you were to remove this, I guess my next favorite one might be the Keen Swordcraft. That magic 24%. It's not a huge decrease from the magic of 30%, but at least you get the decreased AP consumption for very long second Guild War fights. There is a little bit of a niche there for the lightning res, but again, it's one of those things. I don't think she offers a big upside here. There's a lot of Earth units that already have this kind of lightning resistance built into them that it's nice to have. Maybe not a game changer though. Now for the counter abilities, all of these are very average. They're not bad. Auto Potion's my favorite here for that chance to restore HP to self. But Arrow Guard is a noteworthy one because she's got that minus 15% missile res. This is a 100% chance counter. It will always activate unless that missile unit has reduced counter chance. and it will reduce the damage by 30%. So, despite the fact that that's a negative 15% missile res, so she'll normally take an extra 15% damage, this will simultaneously go the other way and reduce it by 30%. So it ends up being a net benefit only if the enemy does not have reduced counter chance. So I like that they gave this in here for her, where she's going to get nuked by missile if you're not preparing for it, but there's some counterplay should you have to go that route. Now for the main job buffs, her first priority is actually this teammate buff here, Princess's Decision. This is an effect for ally where it's Dispel, Protect, and Shell for 3 turns. I really like this a lot. It's for her and the ally. It's a magic buff of 40%, so this will give her an extra about 160 magic. That's actually really important, and 20 spirit for herself as well. The secondary buff here is the auto life ward, and that's that range height of 2. It's 2 squares away. For an ally, it will buff their AoE res by 25. It'll grant shell for them, and it'll give herself a re-raise. So I really like the conjunction of these two abilities. Medane's protection is a more riskier one to get off, just given her innate range, but it's a good one. This gives herself protect and shell and a decreased chance of being targeted, although I do think the TOR option is likely a better third option, or even a sub-job buff, as we'll talk about soon. But overall, these two that I just went over, Princess's Decision and Auto Life Ward, definitely two to focus on. Now for the main job offensive, I am ever so slightly confused by some of the things on this main job. You know, the max range is 5 squares away on this giant diamond. We'll talk about this one first. That's a 220% mod. It's a double hit, but it's magic damage, which doesn't chain with itself, and it's typeless, which means you don't get earth chain. So I'm kind of confused why they even gave this a double hit to begin with. She doesn't strike me as a great earth PvE unit for like guild raid top score, so I kind of don't know why they went this way. But this is the ability that has that follow-up attack of the Cura for the 120 mod. I like the extended range here, where some of the other, sequence healing abilities are a little more closer to the unit themselves. This Cura has a little bit more of a range and a little more of a height flexibility, so I like the way what they've done with this follow-up skill. And I want to talk about the decreased spirit pen of 30 for just a second, where again, if you consider, let's say Garnet has 60 spirit after that main buff, which she very likely will, against a 50 spirit enemy, they'll pretend as if you only had 30 spirit. If you hit them though with this debuff and drop them down to 20 spirit pen, when they hit you, it'll be as if you had 48. So you're talking about an extra 18% damage reduction on the enemy of what they could possibly do against your resistances. So it's a pretty sizable debuff for those magic units. Now, one of the things that I truly don't understand is what they're doing here with Dark Golem and Sheraton. These abilities are, number one, identical in range, identical in height, identical in cast time. The only difference is one is weaker than the other. From an AI perspective, I see no reason why she would ever use Sheraton unless she ran out of Dark Golem. Or maybe if an enemy is like very, very low health, she'll use this to conserve AP. But man, this is like a big swing and a miss for how redundant these two abilities are in terms of range, height, cast time. The AI is always going to prioritize Dark Golem, which is a good ability. Dispel Courage is obviously great, but makes her offensive capabilities very one-dimensional here. Now, for the limit break, this is honestly a really great limit break. This is a giant diamond that dispels all debuffs. That's things like magic res down 38%. That's the Helena AoE debuff. That's the Bridal Elia lightning imperil. All of those things I really like. It's a curative ability of 310 mod as well. That's enormous. And it increases all attack resistances by 10%. That effect is okay. It obviously yields better results against things like Pierce and Missile and Strike, where there's a little bit less penetration on average. But overall, this is a really superb limit break for what her role is supposed to be. Now, we look at the cast time breakpoints. This is where I want to talk about some of the pros and cons. So number one, if you equip her passive for the 250 down, the only thing this will change, and this is an important one though, is Dark Mega Flare. Now, we have not seen the Dark Odin ability yet. That's on the sub job in a second here. Dark Mega Flare, it will take it from 4 ticks down to 3 ticks, but it will not affect any of the other skills. So it's really important for Dark Mega Flare to get that extra breakpoint, but doesn't do anything for the rest of the skills. If you instead said, hey, let me go with a Truststone passive instead, and not use her regular passive, I have good news. You'll actually achieve the same thing here of 3 ticks. So you can pick either one of these and you're going to get the same benefits. I actually do like that flexibility, but 3 ticks might be a long time for many. And so if you end up going with both together, her passive and the Truststone passive, that'll bump everything up to 2 ticks. So while I like the flexibility that you're not locked into that passive ability, you'll still stay at 3 ticks, which might be a little bit too long for some. You'll get her to that sweet spot of 2, though, if you equip both at the same time. I want to bring up if you introduce an Esper into the fold here for an extra 200, it will not change Dark Mega Flare, but it'll change everything else. But my biggest potential thing I want to try to lean into with her, I don't normally hyper focus on a TMR for a unit, but I really do want to here with the Dark Fina TMR, where number one, this is a spirit-oriented accessory. The 7 agility is much needed for her speed, but the ability here, the extra 40 magic res pen will get her up to 80, and that decrease in skill activation time will bump down everything here if you combine all 3 of these, the passive, the Truststone passive, down to 1 tick, which I think is really noteworthy. And you'll notice the remaining cast time of 200 is 200, meaning if you put the Esper in here as well, I think it's overkill, but if you did, she would literally be insta-cast. It would be immediate. All of these abilities would be cast. So if you want to hyper-tune her for that, you can, but I don't think the Esper is necessary, but I wanted to shout out this TMR. I really like this, not only for the stats, but the ability as well. Now, for the sub-jobs, the Princess of Alexandria, this one's actually not bad. I like the healing potential here for that restore HP. This is one of those things that if you're expecting some evasion, if she just ends up casting this Curata level skill, not the end of the world. I think Summon Dark Odin is okay. You know, it's obviously inferior technically to the Dark Mega Flare, not only in mod, but just in like size versatility. That being said, we're seeing a lot of abilities now that reduce damage based on the size of the AoE. So this is a smaller AoE ability, so even though it's a lower mod, might actually do more damage. The poison is okay, but a lot of people are gearing for it at the moment that I don't think it's a huge upside. But this sub-job, actually not a bad sub-job. I think this is probably my preferred in the majority of instances, unless you're really theory crafting hard, in which case I really like the Sword Sorcerer for a couple reasons. Number one, we talked about that third buff on the main job, that's the Reduce Hate and the Protect and Shell. I almost would want to just replace that one with this one if you're going to fill that niche. You can still get herself Shell, and you'll also get the 25 magic res. But the coolest thing about this sub-job to me is those Earth slash chains with someone like King Bradley, where you got 2 different kinds of double hits here. The mods are respectable. That slash res pen of 40. Remember, if you have the Mont King of Lions vision card equipped in your Earth team, you'll already be at 35 slash res pen. That'll put her up to 75. If you went with a Truststone passive of 10, gets up to 85. That's a sizable slash res pen to chain with Bradley on a spirit scaling ability that's non-reflectable. And again, even her main job is all non-reflectable. So I think there's some really interesting stuff to play with here, in addition to the Enhancing Blade, which is a magic damage increase as well. I think this ability at 15 AP is superior to that Summon Sheraton ability. That's that like low AP one. So I like this sub-job, quite honestly. Which brings us then to the Kotodama Wielder. This one's okay. I think Anti-Magic Wall is probably my favorite of the buffs. I think that Magic Barrier is a really strong thing to have, but I don't love the rest of the things on this job. Nimble Movement, I don't think you're going to get a lot of good usage out of. And Unevadable Pain, while actually not the worst ability, it's an instacast, by the way, which I think is a really nice thing. I think I would just prefer the upside of the other sub-jobs. I think the buff is really the best thing about this, but I have to play with this a little bit more. It may not be as bad as I think it is. But now let's go to the TMR review. I'm going to save you a lot of time. This is a really bad TMR. It's exceptionally bad. Not only from the fact that stat-wise, it's really genuinely whatever. The effect, though, these 3 status effects are very much guardable in other ways. The Restore IP of 15 is kind of whatever, but it's a 1-cast TMR. That alone is a significant step back from a power creep perspective. This is a terrible TMR. I'll just leave it at that. Now for the job-based vision cards, I've made this chart to kind of show some overlap of where certain vision cards fall and how many they have in common with other groupings here. I have highlighted in yellow the ones that I think are my favorites that have the agility or the AoE res or the unit res. There's 2 classes that I think I see some of the best upside so far. Number 1 is the Dagger class themselves. I think there's a lot in common here you can use with the Greater Demon, and even the enhancement of the Eve, which has the slash res pen, which are talking about that kind of cool sub-job synergy. But Sword Knight is another one here, where Bloody Road, the Melnia vision card, is one of the best in the game. Inherited Wills is a really good vision card for the reaction block rate and the HP percent. And the last honorable mention that I don't hate is the Staff Black Mage and Katana. Those 2 jobs have a decent amount of overlap that you can use Greater Demon there. But even just talking about like a mono mace team or something with 2 mace units, you know, when I look at the mace units, Raph is obviously the standout, probably the one you're going to be building around. The rest of the units are okay. I think Dagger probably ranks closer to the top, though. Out of all the mace units you would probably want to put into a rainbow team, I think Sadali is the only other one with a good case. But, you know, when I look at the vision cards here for mace, this is one of those classes where Mace is on some of the best vision cards in the game, whether the future VV vision card, which opens up a whole bunch of new doors with the Staff Black Mage, the Melnia vision card we know is great, Greater Demon is another great one, the Road to Horn has been used a ton over the last couple months, and even the Zidane vision card that just came out. Between what they have for Pierce units and Dagger units, that's one of my favorite things about the Mace class, which is where I think one of Dagger's relative strengths really comes in, is the fact that she can be used in a variety of some of the best teams, because those are the best teams based off the best vision cards. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the sample builds in a second, but for now, the weapon optimization, the Tiger Racket. This is an S tier weapon for the aesthetic. If you were to replace the weapon skin in game, this is the cutest staff ever. It looks so good on so many units. This is not my favorite staff for Dagger though. Stat wise, it's fair. The unique things for that 30% magic, it's 10% more than a Truststone passive. Not bad, not epic. Magic attack 15 is whatever. You get that on many stabs. Evocation gauge boost of 30. We've seen this before. It's not nearly as impactful in auto PvP as people like to make it out to be. And magic res pen of 20 is very good. Here's why this is not my favorite staff for her, because the Dawn Lantern also shares 20 magic res pen, but it also has 8 AoE res and 15 healing power, which both of these attributes I think are spot on perfect for her. You'll have to do a magic attack 10 Truststone passive instead. We'll talk about that in the Truststone recommendations. But this to me is definitely superior for a weapon choice for her. Now, another honorable mention is the Zeus Mace. Most people have not farmed this though, because it's okay. I don't like this nearly as much as the Dawn Lantern. It's probably superior damage-wise than the other two options. The evocation gauge boost, again, is okay, but doesn't really have a huge PvP impact. So, honorable mention, but I think the Dawn Lantern's a sweet spot. And the Trial of Reckoning item in the future. This is a noteworthy thing to keep in mind, if only for the 10 AoE res. I love the fact that you can get the 8 on the Dawn Lantern of AoE, 10 unit res here, 20 extra crit evade here. The HP is kind of whatever, because again, you're getting 10% HP anyways. This is only 10% more, which I think is like around 400 HP or so. The Spirit of 10 is certainly nice built into that niche, but if you're equipping the Dawn Lantern, we'll look at this in the builds right now. I already said earlier, I think the Producer's Bow Tie is a really good second option here for, tailoring AI, but even something like the White Marshmallow at this moment would be crucially important for the status ailment resistances for her. So while that TOR item is good, it's debatable whether you can fit it into your build. Now this first one that I went with is a mono earth build. And I purposely went with the Dark Siren Esper here instead of Bahamut, because this one to me, this is a team, if you really like hyper gearing for anti-lightning, that certainly gives it to her. The debuff weakening effect is really great for that Helena matchup. There's a lot of accuracy on that Esper too, which he desperately needs. So, in making this team, I also used the Halloween vision card, which is the 15% agility. Now you could just throw the Black Rose Helena Dark vision card for agility. I think most have that. I put this one here though just because it's got the Spirit on it, which is their niche. So this is like a best in slot agility card for that team. And I'm overinflating her HP at the moment, not only because she gets 10% HP from the mastery abilities of Bradley and Dialdo, but the Golem sub vision card here gives her a bunch of HP. And so right now for passives, I'm using that cast time reduction one. I'm using a Spirit set for Truststones on the left side and an agility set on the right side. I've got these current passives equipped for the Truststone passives. And when we look at the stats, she gets up to 8,500 HP, but again, that is slightly inflated here. That Golem card gives her an extra 800 HP or so, so she's normally at 7,700 without it. The magic stat is only at 1,222, and again, if you want Bahamut instead, you'd likely get closer to that 1,400 range, which is better, but man, 1,200 magic is a tough stat to stomach for this unit. Now, agility at 104, okay, not amazing. This defensive stats here, 35 unit res, 43 AoE res is respectable. I like that a lot. She's got a ton of earth attack modifier here from the cards. Resistances are okay. She's at that 30% magic res at the moment. The Dark Golem vision card is really bumping up her survivability a bit here though. And so I think this is a really good mono earth team, but it's one that's definitely more for anti-magic. Where you consider she hopefully gives Bradley Shell, gives him Protect Remove, which he doesn't have innately. Because if you're bringing this Earth team against anyone else, I would tend to think Renault or Queen Mashri are just as good, if not better, than Dagger in this instance. This is really for finding that anti-magic team. Now the second build here is one that I think is kind of that rainbow strategy that I'm trying to lean into. I'm putting her in a team here with Raph and Sephiroth. And again, this is where it gets difficult to theory craft a rainbow team, because you have to be a little comfortable being uncomfortable with losing out on some stats, knowing that you're trading off for the abilities. And so in this build, this to me is a team where, like, if you were using Dark to hunt some of the light teams, particularly those very strong magic light teams, normally that third unit in the Dark team is Dark Fina. But Dark Fina doesn't really add anything anti-magic to that team in terms of that matchup, but Dagger certainly does. And so if you consider the teammate buff to Sephiroth, let's say, she would give him AoE res and Shell. She would give him Protect Remove on all his abilities for 3 turns, which he does not have innately on that main job. So your Sephiroth is getting a nice bump against magic there, in addition to the decrease of Spirit Pen of the damage he's going to be taking. And if you consider Dark Fina has no like curative potential unless you make her the devout sub and put the bow tie on her, make her lag behind intentionally, Dagger adds some sustainability to this team with the limit break, with the cure on demand, with a TMR option if you wanted to go that way. I didn't do it here, but you certainly could. And so I kept the same build here for equipment, kept the same Truststones, but you're going to see a big step back on the stats. And so in this build, I put the Holiday Party in here so everyone could get AoE res, but the Anima Vision card means that Dagger gets no unit res, which obviously is a huge red flag. And you look at that HP level, 6,700 HP is paltry, it's terrible. 1,400 magic is okay. 111 agility is certainly nice, faster than what we saw before. The resistances here, not that bad. You're looking at near 30% slash res, strike res, and magic res, so that's relatively better. You know, you still have some flexibility, in my opinion, in her sub-vision card. I put this one in here for the extra AoE res for her and Raph, where again, if you're considering going against Helena teams, a lot of extra AoE damage. And so yeah, while stat-wise, this is a step back, theory crafting-wise, this is likely a better team to go into Mono Light than Dark Fina is, just being honest here. Which brings us to a third build, which is not my favorite build, but again, we're talking about that rainbow perspective. This is using that Melnia Vision card with the overlap with the Sword Knight category of characters. And again, Dagger's role here is literally to help enable these 2 powerhouse units in lasting longer against magic teams. And so I've kept the equipment here the same, the pass is all the same. When we look at the stats here, you know, the HP is a little bit better here because this Inherited Will Subvision card is that extra HP for team. So 7,600 HP is not bad, 1,400 magic, and she's on that Bahamut Esper instead of Dark Siren. You're looking at 24 unit res, 43 AoE res, that's certainly respectable, 85% reaction block rate. You're going to be giving one of these units Shell and AoE res. You're going to likely grant King Bradley Protect removal, which Squall does have remove Protect, but it's on a much shorter ability. But the goal of this team is you're just going to let Squall and Bradley cook. I have the Halloween Lucio Vision card here on main for the luck, for their accuracy, for the agility for them. And I have the Exorcist Subvision card here because there's no other slash res pen in this team. But again, if you wanted to go with that Sword Sorcerer Subjob for Dagger, she's also going to benefit from that slash res pen. So this is, again, a team that many might be uncomfortable with because it seems a little odd, but Dagger has just a specific role to fill, and she does it in this team to enable them against going against magic teams. Now finally, for the Truststone recommendations, left side, I would recommend HP or Spirit or Defense, mostly the Spirit if possible though. Per usual, HP and Luck are necessities, the rest of them are really matchup specific. The right side though, these are my general recommendations for what you should hunt for passives, but remember, there's certain ones that don't overlap with the weapon you're equipping. And so because I recommended the Dawn Lantern, that magic res pen and the healing power you don't need on your Truststones because it's not going to stack. So I grade them out here. I'd probably replace it with the magic attack 10 and earth attack 10. But again, this is just some general snapshot of what you should probably try to hunt for. But that's the Dagger review in total. Again, this is a character that's probably more complex than people are ready for. It's a niche character that has a good niche and is great for the timing of things that came out. There are some stat deficiencies, though, that I am very much worried about. It's a character that, like I was joking about, but I'm kind of serious about, really needs the max reincarnation to actually be like super competitive from an HP and a magic perspective. It's a decent free unit. Maybe hit the mark though with Renoa being released so recently, so soon. But that's where I talk about the upside really being the rainbow teams, not the mono earth teams, where Renoa is a glove unit, which has its own set of vision cards that are exceptional to put into. And then you have a mace unit who has got its own set of vision cards that's exceptional to put into. So it's not a swing and a miss. It's just not amazing. Well, I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll talk to you later.